The old man stumbled into the gas station, his coat torn, boots caked with dust, lips cracked from heat. His eyes darted like he was tracking something no one else could see. He muttered under his breath, "The signal. It's back. It's live again." Without a word to anyone, he walked past the counter and stepped outside to the rusted payphone near the dumpster. The young clerk behind the register scoffed. Another drunk vet, lost in his own little war. He laughed, not knowing what had just been set in motion. 5 minutes later, 3 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot, and military police in full gear stepped out. Because the old man had just called a frequency no civilian was ever meant to know still existed. Jack Sutter wasn't the kind of man people noticed. Not anymore. At 76 years old, with a bent back and sun-leathered skin, he shuffled along the edge of a quiet Nevada town, like a ghost who'd forgotten how to disappear. His coat was always the same, a brown military-style trench, faded at the seams and patched at the elbows. His boots, crusted with desert dust, moved slowly but deliberately, as if each step followed a rhythm only he could hear. No one really knew where he came from. He wasn't listed in town records, didn't rent a place, and wasn't known to stay at any shelter. But he always appeared, every Thursday, at exactly 5 p.m. Same place, same route. He'd arrive at the Sinclair gas station just outside town, dig into his coat pocket with shaking hands and pull out a handful of coins, always exact change, to use the weathered blue payphone mounted beside the ice machine. He never bought anything, never spoke more than a word or two to the staff. Just coins, phone, and silence. People talked. The stories varied. Some believed Jack was harmless, just another aging vet fallen through the cracks, suffering from old ghosts and too many lonely nights. Others weren't so generous. Teenagers laughed and called him Radio Jack. Rumors spread that he once claimed to have hacked a Russian satellite with a gum wrapper and a dial tone. Adults smirked, shook their heads, and blamed it on too much war and not enough help. Jack didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply kept coming. Week after week, his eyes always scanning the horizon, always listening for something no one else could hear. Tina, the gas station clerk, was used to him by now. She was 25, overworked, underpaid, and halfway through her second shift when Jack arrived most Thursdays. She'd mutter "Colonel Cray Cray" right on schedule as she counted cigarettes behind the counter. Once she'd asked him, jokingly, who he was calling. He'd looked at her, not angry, not offended, just tired. "Someone who still listens," he said, before stepping back outside into the wind. It unsettled her. Not enough to change her tone, but enough to remember it. And then there were the things he'd mutter under his breath when he thought no one was near. Echo 9 still active. SIGINT loop isn't clean. Compromised vectors. Phrases that sounded like military code, but made no sense to anyone else. At best, they chalked it up to PTSD. At worst, they said he was just nuts. But what no one realized, not Tina, not the kids who laughed at him, not the passers-by who stared, was that Jack Sutter wasn't confused. He wasn't broken. He wasn't lost in some imagined past. He was listening, waiting, and soon the whole town would find out exactly what, or who, he'd been waiting for. It was hotter than usual for early May, the kind of heat that shimmered off car hoods and baked the pavement into soft tar. By 4:50 p.m., the Sinclair gas station felt like a frying pan. The only movement came from a lazy ceiling fan over the counter and a sweating soda fridge that barely kept up. Tina had been refilling the chip rack when she spotted him again. Jack Sutter, trudging down the dirt shoulder like clockwork. But something about him looked different that day. His steps were uneven. His shirt was more disheveled than usual. And his eyes, they didn't drift like they normally did. They were locked in, focused. She watched as he approached the store without even glancing at her. Normally he gave a small nod, sometimes a grunt of acknowledgement. Not today. His lips were moving, barely audible, and his hands were shaking more than usual. "Great," Tina muttered. "Colonel Cray Cray's having a full episode today." He paused just inside the door, looked around, not at the drinks, not at the register, but at the back wall like he was reading something invisible. Then he walked straight back out toward the payphone. "Hey," Tina called after him instinctively. "You need water or—" He raised one hand behind him in a dismissive gesture. He wasn't stopping. She leaned over the counter to watch. Jack reached the phone like a man on a mission. He dug into his pocket, pulled out a handful of coins, and fed them one by one into the battered slot. Then slowly, with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb, he began dialing. The keypad chirped. Once, then again, then again. But it wasn't a phone number. Not a real one anyway. The pattern was too complex, too methodical, 2 tones, pause, 3 tones, pause. A long sequence of tones that no local business or house line could possibly match. Then Jack pressed the receiver to his ear and spoke. But the voice wasn't the muttering, confused drawl of a wandering old man. It was sharp, precise, crisp like the crack of a rifle. "This is Ghostlight 9, checking transmission vector Alpha Bravo 0, emergency override in progress. Repeat, priority echo." Tina's stomach dropped. She stood frozen behind the counter, unsure of what she'd just heard. Ghostlight? Vector what? Override? Her first instinct was to laugh. Maybe he was rehearsing a scene from an old spy movie, but her gut said otherwise. Jack didn't play pretend. Then her brain clicked to what she had to do, what she'd been trained to do since that knife-wielding transient last summer. She reached for the phone. 911, what's your emergency? "Yeah," Tina said, voice low. I think we've got a guy outside the station. Older man. He's talking nonsense into the payphone. Might be drunk or unstable. He's acting off. Is he threatening anyone?" "No, but I don't know. He's saying military stuff. Codes. Override commands. It's creepy." "Is he armed?" "No, just hurry, please. Something's not right." As she hung up, she looked back out the window. Jack was still on the phone, still speaking in that same cold mechanical tone. Sweat beaded down his neck, but he didn't flinch, didn't blink. Behind him, 2 teenage boys in tank tops were filming with their phones. Tina stepped out from behind the counter, heart racing. Her mouth was dry. For the first time in all the Thursdays he'd come in, she wasn't sure if Jack was confused. She was starting to believe he knew exactly what he was doing, and that terrified her more than anything. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up slow and casual. No lights, no sirens, just a lazy crunch of tires over sun-baked gravel. Deputy Ron Keller stepped out first, sunglasses reflecting the sun and his ego. He was in his early 30s, thick-set, always chewing on something, gum, jerky, or his own arrogance. Behind him, Deputy Mark Lang, leaner and younger, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Inside the gas station, Tina waved them over, pointing through the window. "He's out by the phone," she whispered. "Still talking, still saying weird stuff. It's been like 10 minutes now." Keller grinned. "Great, another heat stroke hero." The 2 deputies approached Jack slowly. He was still gripping the phone, voice low and deliberate, eyes locked on the empty horizon. He didn't even turn as they approached. "Sir," Keller said almost mockingly, "you want to hang up the Cold War and talk to us real quick?" Jack didn't respond. His hand trembled slightly on the receiver. "Sir," Keller repeated, firmer now, "you're disturbing the peace. Time to step away from the phone." Jack finally turned. His expression was unreadable. Not frightened, not aggressive, just focused. "Tell Fort Pendleton," he said evenly. "Ghostlight 9 is active." Keller blinked. "What the hell is Ghostlight? You some kind of movie extra or what?" Without warning, he reached for Jack's arm and twisted it behind his back. Jack didn't resist, but he didn't comply either. Just stood there, calm as stone. Lang hesitated. "Ron, maybe we should just ask questions first?" "Ask him what? What planet he's calling?" Keller laughed, slapping one cuff onto Jack's wrist. "Let's get him off the damn phone before he orders a missile strike." As Keller shoved Jack forward, the old man's voice didn't rise. It just cut through the tension like a knife through silk. "Mission integrity breached," he said clearly. "Possible sleeper compromised." For a second, even Keller stopped laughing. Inside the cruiser, the radio squawked. Open mic still live from Lang's shoulder unit. Jack's words transmitted clean across the department's internal frequency. 17 miles away, a highway patrol unit sat parked off I-80, killing time behind a billboard that read, "Truckers, welcome." Trooper Mason Riley leaned back in his seat, boots up, coffee half empty, until he heard it. Integrity breached, possible sleeper compromised. Riley sat bolt upright. That wasn't the usual nonsense from traffic stops or domestic calls. That was language he hadn't heard since his last deployment in Kandahar. His eyes narrowed. He keyed his mic. "Dispatch, can you replay that last unit's transmission?" The dispatcher, a woman named Laura, paused. "Stand by." 2 seconds later, the phrase repeated over the system, clear and cold. Laura's voice returned, suddenly lower. "Mason, what the hell was that?" Riley didn't answer. He was already pulling up his contact list. His thumb hovered over one name, Sergeant Paul Finch, USMC, Rito Rito. Regional Emergency Liaison. He tapped it. Finch picked up after one ring. "Paul, you hear anything about Ghostlight protocols still being active?" Silence on the line. Then, "Where did you hear that word?" "A guy at a gas station, arrested, used the phrase Ghostlight 9. Said a sleeper might be compromised." Another pause. Then Finch said 3 words that made Riley's blood run cold. "Lock that town down." Back at the station, Jack was being loaded into the cruiser. He didn't resist, but he smiled, just slightly. 20 minutes after Jack Sutter was cuffed and loaded into the back of the cruiser, the gas station returned to its usual slow rhythm. The teenagers had gotten bored and wandered off. Tina was back behind the counter, nervously checking the parking lot every few seconds. The deputies were inside, filling out a short incident report. Mostly routine paperwork. Keller cracking jokes between lines about Operation Crazy Grandpa. Then they heard it, a low, humming engine. Not one, but 3. Black SUVs, unmarked, gliding in formation like sharks through an empty parking lot. No sirens, no flashing lights, just quiet, coordinated arrival. The first SUV pulled into a stop at an angle. Doors opened in sync. From the passenger side of the lead vehicle, a man stepped out. Tall, squared shoulders, clean-cut in full military police uniform. The patches on his arm weren't standard. His eyes scanned the scene and stopped at Jack in the back seat of the cruiser. Without a word, he walked straight toward the vehicle. Keller stood halfway through a sip of his iced tea and dropped it. Lang stepped back instinctively. You see the patch on his shoulder?" "Yeah," Keller said slowly. "That's not local." The MP reached the cruiser, motioned for the door to be opened. Jack, still calm, sat upright like he had been waiting for this moment. No surprise, no confusion, only recognition. The MP gave a short nod. "Ghostlight 9. Jack blinked once. "Authorization code?" The MP replied instantly. "Vector Echo 6. Override Alpha confirmed." Jack smiled faintly. "Took you long enough." Tina had stepped out of the gas station, holding her phone in both hands, recording without realizing it. Customers and bystanders froze, unsure if this was real or a film shoot. Keller walked toward the MP, uncertain whether to assert authority or just disappear. "Excuse me, sir, can someone tell me what this is about?" The MP didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on Jack. Then a second officer stepped out of the SUV holding a satellite phone. Heavy, gray, clearly military issue. He handed it to the first MP, who turned and offered it to Jack. "It's for you." Jack took the phone. "Sutter." There was a pause, then a deep voice came through, steady and formal. "Colonel Sutter, we never stopped listening." Jack closed his eyes for a moment. The weight of years seemed to lift, just slightly. On the other end, the voice continued. "We're activating the dormant protocol. Your signal reached the buried channel. Your instincts were right." Jack exhaled. "I told you it wasn't over," he said quietly. Everyone nearby heard only half the conversation. But the presence of those SUVs, the MPs, and the tone of the men speaking was enough to silence even Keller's sarcasm. Lang leaned toward Tina and whispered, "What the hell is going on?" Tina's voice trembled. "I don't know. But I think that old man just made a phone call the government's been waiting 20 years to hear." The truth came out quietly. Not through press conferences or breaking news alerts, but through whispered conversations, declassified scraps, and the careful nod of a man in uniform. His name wasn't just Jack, and he wasn't just another forgotten veteran. He was Colonel Jack Sutter, United States Army, retired, though technically the retirement paperwork never existed. In his day, Jack had been one of the leading minds in communications warfare, a master of signal intelligence, encryption layers, and silent protocols. His specialty wasn't guns or glory. It was invisible battles, fought on frequencies most people never even knew existed. In 1986, Jack helped design and field test an experimental communication matrix known only as Echo Ghostlight, a covert system used to relay high-priority information across Black Ops units stationed in hostile territory. The system operated on low-frequency pulses, layered with randomized encryption so sophisticated that even today, parts of it remain unmatched. Ghostlight was meant to be a last resort fallback, a way to reach out across the void if all else failed. And for a while it worked. But during an unsanctioned mission deep inside Eastern Europe, something went wrong. Jack and his team were cut off, not just from each other, but from the very network they helped build. The operation was erased from records, deemed a failure. Jack Sutter was listed MIA, presumed dead by his command. Only, he didn't die. He survived. Details are scarce, even now, even among those who came to retrieve him. But what's known is this. Jack made it out. He crossed borders, buried documents, and carried secrets no one ever meant for one man to hold alone. When he returned, his file was sealed, and his uniform was quietly retired. No medals, no ceremony, just a man with too much knowledge and too little use in peacetime. But Jack wasn't done. For nearly 4 decades, he lived under the radar, drifting between towns, surviving on his pension and his paranoia. He wasn't waiting for help. He was listening, monitoring the bands, watching for movement, and most of all, watching for a signal. In recent months, Jack had picked up static, something faint, embedded deep within analog bands. Something that didn't belong, a pulse, an echo. To everyone else, it sounded like interference. To Jack, it was the heartbeat of a ghost. He believed someone, or something, had reactivated a compromised ghostlight frequency. And if that signal was truly live again, then it wasn't just a threat to old secrets. It could unearth an operation so buried, so dangerous, that even mentioning it aloud might trigger automated defense protocols still dormant. He tried to warn people, sent letters, emailed retired contacts, called bases. No one listened. Until now. Until today, when he walked to a dusty payphone in the middle of nowhere, fed it exact change, and reactivated a code the Pentagon thought had been erased decades ago. For the first time in 39 years, someone picked up the line on the other end. And for the first time in just as long, the name Colonel Jack Sutter appeared in an active channel log. No longer missing, no longer forgotten. Just active. The men in uniform didn't say much. They didn't have to, because by the time Colonel Jack Sutter ended that satellite call, everything had already begun moving. It crossed secure channels and restricted databases. Red flags started blinking. Not because of the call itself, but because of what it had triggered. Jack hadn't just called for help. He had activated something. A failsafe, a long-forgotten emergency protocol buried deep within the Department of Defense's legacy systems. The kind of digital ghost that only a handful of engineers even remembered existed. And Jack had spoken to it like an old friend. The gas station payphone, rusted and overlooked for years, had become the unlikely epicenter of a classified alert, one that hadn't sounded since the Cold War. Jack's choice to use that specific phone hadn't been random. It was intentional, strategic. Most modern lines are monitored, recorded, tracked, but analog payphones, the few that still remain, operate outside the digital grid. Their signals, while ancient, are difficult to intercept or trace in real time. Jack knew this. He also knew something else, something almost no one in the country still remembered. There existed a single emergency frequency known only to 6 individuals across the entire United States defense network. It was called Echo Vector 9, an encrypted band designed in the early 1980s for use in only the direst of situations: mass compromise, foreign infiltration, or the reactivation of buried assets. It wasn't part of any digital system. It was analog only, hard-coded, non-updatable, and for decades it had been quiet, until Jack picked it up. What he heard wasn't a full broadcast, just a faint pulsing sequence. 4 long beeps, one short, a pause, then again. It was an identification tone, a signal used to identify covert sleeper nodes that had been placed strategically throughout the world during the height of the Cold War. These nodes were designed to remain dormant, hidden within communication infrastructure, waiting for one of two triggers: a manual reactivation or a signal from an unknown hostile source. Jack had heard it before, once, back in 1986. And when it reappeared now, nearly 40 years later, he didn't hesitate. He knew what it meant. Something, or someone, had unintentionally reawakened a sleeping asset. The Department of Defense initially dismissed the alert as a glitch, but Jack's transmission through the analog pay line matched one of the 6 original authorization tones embedded in the Echo Vector system, a tone only Jack Sutter had ever possessed. Within minutes, confirmation came from Fort Meade. The signal was real. A dormant node had been reactivated, one that had been presumed decommissioned in 1994 and never logged again. Its location? Still classified. But its function? Simple. It was a trigger point, a final line of communication for covert operations that were too sensitive to fully shut down. Someone had stumbled onto it, maybe through old hardware, maybe through hacked legacy systems. The military wasn't sure, but what they did know was chilling. Had Jack not caught the signal and shut it down, the node would have escalated, initiating a fail-deadly message designed to erase every linked file, contact, and physical evidence associated with that Cold War program. It would have destroyed data, and it could have cost lives. Jack had stopped it with nothing more than a handful of coins and a forgotten payphone. The brass at the Pentagon called it a miracle. Jack just called it listening. He'd spent nearly 4 decades waiting for that sound, checking the bands, cross-referencing bursts of static most people would ignore. He wasn't chasing ghosts, he was guarding them. And in doing so, he'd proven that even in a world of satellites, drones, and biometric sensors, sometimes the only person who can save the system is the one the system left behind. By the following morning, the sleepy gas station on the edge of town had become the most watched spot in Nevada. News vans from Reno, Vegas, and even out-of-state affiliates crowded the parking lot, their satellite dishes spinning skyward like metal sunflowers. Reporters stood in front of camera crews rehearsing lines while producers scrambled to confirm what had already leaked across secure networks. An elderly man had reactivated a Cold War protocol from a payphone. And he was right. The story had gone viral overnight. But this wasn't just a military headline. It had become something bigger, a public reckoning, a moral wake-up call. People weren't just talking about encryption codes and dormant nodes. They were talking about how Jack Sutter was treated before anyone knew his name. Tina, pale and visibly shaken, stood before a small group of cameras holding a written statement in trembling hands. She wore no makeup, no smile, only guilt. "I want to apologize to Colonel Jack Sutter," she began, eyes glistening. "I mocked him, I judged him, and I dismissed his pain as noise. But it turns out I was the one not listening. I hope he can forgive me. I'm sorry." Her words aired on every local network by noon. The sheriff's department followed next. A press release was issued from the county office at 10:45 a.m. It read, "We regret our handling and treatment of Colonel Jack Sutter. While our deputies responded according to the information available at the time, we acknowledge that no man who served this country, especially one of his legacy, deserves to be disrespected or dismissed. We offer our sincere apology and full cooperation with any military inquiries." Sheriff Ward, the man who signed the statement, declined interviews. Word had it he'd requested to speak to Jack in person. But Jack wasn't at the station anymore. He had left before sunrise quietly, just as he always had. No parade, no speech, just silence. Still, the people came. By noon, the front of the gas station had transformed into a tribute wall. Dozens of veterans from nearby counties drove in, some in trucks, others in wheelchairs, and a few on foot. They left handwritten notes, unit patches, and challenge coins pressed against the brick wall near the payphone. Someone brought a small American flag and staked it next to the ice machine. Another lit a candle. One note, written in shaky cursive, read, "From one ghost to another, you weren't forgotten. We were just waiting for someone brave enough to speak first." Tina sat near the window and watched them come. One by one, quiet, respectful. Some saluted, some stood in silence. Not a single person laughed that day, because now they all knew the truth. Jack Sutter wasn't just a mysterious old man. He was a watchman, and he'd been right all along. 1 week later, the dusty little town where Jack Sutter had been ignored for years hosted something it had never seen before. A full military ceremony, conducted not at a base, but right in the town square. The courthouse lawn was freshly mowed, folding chairs lined up in perfect rows. Flags from every branch of the armed forces flanked a simple podium draped in deep navy blue. Soldiers in full-dress uniforms stood at attention as townspeople, veterans, and reporters filled every available seat, some even standing along the sidewalks. Jack Sutter sat in the front row, his trench coat pressed for the first time in decades. His hair was still wild, his posture still weary, but his face held something new: peace. On his left breast, beside old campaign ribbons long forgotten, was a fresh pin, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, reissued, engraved, and finally acknowledged. The colonel presenting the honor spoke briefly about Jack's decades of quiet vigilance, calling him a sentinel of forgotten systems, a man who stayed on watch when no one else did. But it wasn't until a younger soldier, no older than 25, stepped up that the crowd truly fell silent. The young man looked out nervously, then back at Jack. "My name is Specialist Brandon Ruiz. I work in cyber defense. A week ago, we were running diagnostics when we picked up the activation of a protocol we didn't even know existed. Echo Vector 9. It was Colonel Sutter's signal that made us dig deeper." He paused, his voice steadying. "Had we ignored it, we would have missed something that could have cost lives. This man didn't just prevent a technical breach. He reminded us that silence doesn't always mean safety, and that sometimes the last man listening is the one who saves us all." A hush swept the square. Then came applause, not the polite kind, but the long-standing kind. Veterans rose first, followed by townspeople. Some saluted, others simply wept. Jack was called to the podium. He moved slowly but without help. Standing before the microphone, he looked over the crowd with the quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to say much to be heard. "You don't always need rank to do the right thing," he said, voice calm and low. "You just need to keep listening." Then he stepped back. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. But in that moment, Jack Sutter was no longer the forgotten man at the payphone. He was the man who heard what no one else could and answered. The ceremony ended as the sun began its slow descent behind the courthouse roof. Chairs scraped softly against concrete, soldiers exchanged quiet handshakes, and the crowd gradually thinned, drifting back to their homes and routines. No fanfare, no parades, just the kind of solemn reverence that didn't need music or speeches to be felt. Jack Sutter didn't linger. He stepped down from the stage, medal still pinned over his heart, and walked away without a word. No escort, no reporters, no family waiting with open arms. Just the slow, steady sound of his boots on cracked pavement, the same way he had walked for decades, unnoticed. He didn't head toward City Hall or the veteran outreach tent. He walked toward the edge of town, toward the gas station. The old Sinclair still buzzed with the dull flicker of a faulty neon sign. The payphone stood quiet, untouched since the day Jack changed everything. But this time someone was waiting beside it. Tina. She wasn't in her uniform today. Just jeans, a flannel shirt, and red eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in a while. In her hands she held two things: a steaming cup of black coffee and a neatly folded American flag, creased with care, edges aligned just right. As Jack approached, she stepped forward, hesitant but sincere. "I didn't want to say it in front of the cameras," she said softly, "but thank you, Colonel, for everything." She extended the flag with both hands, offering it like an apology, like a gesture of understanding far too late. "I'm sorry I didn't see it before." Jack looked at her, really looked. There was no pity in his eyes, no bitterness. He took the flag gently, then the coffee. And for the first time in years, he smiled. "That's okay," he said quietly, a slight warmth in his voice. "Most people never do." They stood there a moment longer, two strangers connected by a moment the world would never fully understand. Behind them, the last rays of sunlight caught the edge of the payphone, casting a long shadow across the gravel. Jack turned, coffee in hand, and began to walk again. Still alone, but no longer forgotten. Jack Sutter's story isn't just about Cold War codes or secret military channels. It's about something much deeper, how we see people, and more importantly, how often we fail to. In a world where we rush to judge, where age is mistaken for weakness and silence for confusion, Jack reminds us of something critical. Wisdom doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits patiently to be heard. How many Jacks have we walked past today? How many veterans, elders, or quiet souls carry stories we never bother to ask about? In today's world of digital noise, maybe we've stopped truly listening, not just to radios, but to each other. And perhaps the biggest question remains, what else might we be missing? Not because it's hidden, but because we no longer expect greatness to come from humble places. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever misjudged someone, only to discover they had a powerful past? Do you believe society does enough to listen to and honor its veterans and elders? Share your experiences or reflections in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation alive, for Jack and for everyone like him. Thank you for watching and honoring this story. If it moved you, please like the video, subscribe, and tap the to hear more powerful, true-to-heart stories that remind us what dignity, service, and humanity truly mean, especially for those who've quietly carried our freedom on their shoulders. Stay kind. Stay listening.